I am Marcus James Dixon with Gold Derby, and we would like to welcome Matt Bowen, one of the composers on Prime Video's Gen V, which of course is a spinoff of The Boys. So, Matt, you have been a part of this franchise for a while now, working on both shows. So, what's the biggest difference between the music of Gen V and the music of The Boys?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, hello. Thank you so much for having me, Marcus. Um, yeah, what is the biggest difference? That was the $1 million question, honestly, as we started working on the show, because it was a new corner of the world. It had it needed a new identity, but at the same time, we couldn't depart too far from the sound, from the world. So the first thing we did, and every time I say we, I'm referring to my co-composer, Chris Leonard's, and I, yeah, we always, it's always easier, and I think in any creative endeavor, to push things too far and then dial it back. So that was what we tried to do, and we did in fact push it too far. And at some point, people started showrunners and directors started saying, "Hey, let's get a little more of that quintessential boys sound," which is great. That's something that we've have 3 seasons worth of in our hip pocket. Um, so to answer that's a broad answer. To if we're going to talk specifics, I don't know how much we want to geek out, but we did bring some female vocals into it. Just it's a very female driven cast. And so we wanted inherently taking place on a college campus. So we did incorporate some female vocals, as the artist goes by the name Katomi, and we recorded her and used her voice in a ton of different ways. Sometimes you would hear it and be like, yeah, that's a voice. And sometimes it would turn into this washy texture where you might not know that the sound source was a female voice, but it was. So that was one of the biggest differences. And outside of that, it was just how much should we table a lot of the grungy garage bandy stuff that is so emblematic of the actual boys from the boys that are not in this. So how much should we table that versus how much do we need to do justice to the sound of the show?
And going back in time a little bit, what was your reaction when you first heard there would be a spinoff of The Boys? I mean, I imagine you were super excited.
Thrilled. I mean, the creative minds behind this whole, now I guess we have to call it, franchise. I'm just hemming and hawing because we do a lot of tongue in cheek. We're not Marvel thing, and now we have spinoffs. Thrilled. I mean, the creative minds behind this are amazing. The writers they have on this are amazing. A sort of new perspective was very welcome. And then especially because this was an opportunity for me to co-score. This was the first thing in the boys world that I co-scored a full season of with Chris. And so it was kind of an opportunity to do that sort of thing.
And the Gen V switches genres and tones, on a dime. One scene's drama, the next is comedy, there's thriller and action. And so what's the biggest challenge in composing a show that's constantly switching tones like that?
Yeah, great question. And I think Chris and I were pretty well versed in that because our sensibilities on how to handle the different scenes, that was probably the thing that was the closest to the boys. When we talk about what was the difference, I think what was the difference in the scores, I think the biggest answer there would be tones and colors and arrangement. If we're using maybe a synth instead of a guitar, or we're using a female vocal, it's something we've never used in the boys. But when it comes to the sensibilities on how to score the scenes, those were kind of in lockstep with how we would approach it on the boys. So that was kind of nice to not have to find our footing there. And to answer your question specifically, we rarely trying to think if we've ever quote unquote played the comedy, because it's just so biting and also just so well written and shot and edited and everything that I don't we don't need music to be commenting on that much. Most of the time, it's just about us getting out of the way,
Mm.
and letting that come through. Um, so we along those lines of it being so kind of well written and shot and everything is we work a lot on the kind of the more subversive level of what emotion is happening here. There's a lot of talk about whose perspective the scene is from, and so we're
Mm.
commenting on that person's perspective, and that question, it always really helps us find the tone for any given scene.
And you mentioned your fellow composer, Chris Leonard. How does it work when you have two composers on a project? How do you decide who does what? Does one of you have a specialty that the other one doesn't? You're shaking your head.
Yeah, no, no, I don't know how it works because it changes every time, every day, it's like the answer is yes to all the questions you asked.
Hmm.
Are we getting in the same room and exploring? Yes. Are we going off into our holes and creating and then sending stuff to each other? More of that, than the former. Do we have specialties? We do. Chris is, I would say, stronger on the orchestral side. I have become a big part of the boys' sound in my recording of myself with various bow instruments. That's not to say, I mean, Chris is bowing weird stuff all the time, and I'm doing orchestral cues. So there's no like real definitive line that kind of gets drawn. It kind of, I don't know how to answer the question, other than the solutions just always seem to present themselves. It does. It's Chris and I do work incredibly well together. So it always seems obvious how we should tackle any given cue or episode. Um, yeah.
And the Emmy nominations are coming up, and you have to submit one episode for consideration. And you went with the pilot, God You, which introduces viewers to this university and all of the fun characters. What made you decide on that episode specifically?
I love that question because it's so, yeah, it felt a little funny to not submit the finale, because the finale just takes your head off, and it was phenomenal. I mean, I don't know. I'm not. Don't make me pick a favorite episode.
Mm.
So I think we were most proud of the pilot because that was the episode. Obvious, it being the creation of a new season where we needed to thread the needle on here's your new sound, and also with a healthy side of here's the boys. And so there were, I think as the season went on, the score actually got more and more boys just
Mm.
because it's responding to what's happening on screen. So I don't know, we kind of felt that the premiere was, the pilot was where it was the biggest range of flavors, I suppose.
Mm.
And then it was really, here's your kind of quintessential boys. Here's kind of some new stuff that you would absolutely never hear in the boys. And then there's the final sequence that's about 5 minutes long, big action climax and stuff. And that one in particular, we were particularly proud of just because that was where we felt like we really cracked the nut on how much boys and how much Gen V are sharing, how they're sharing the same space.
Yeah, I actually rewatched the pilot yesterday, and
Oh,
a few of the tracks really stuck with me. The one you mentioned, where Golden Boy, flies up in the air. I don't know. Should we spoil? I mean, I assume people have seen.
yeah. I mean, what are we? We're 9 months from it. Yeah. Yeah. And we're not talking about the finale. So
Right. So
yeah,
yeah,
let's
I
do it.
would, as a viewer, I mean, the first time I watched it last year, I was completely shocked that he died in the first episode. Here I thought he was going to be the male lead.
Yeah,
And
love that.
rewatching it, listening to the music, it was very like pulse pounding. What could you talk about that track?
Yeah, that's really cool that you checked it out and mentioned that, because that pulse pounding is something. I mean, I have a hard time not going way geeky on this, but you mentioned pulse pounding. That there's in the boys, the bass line, it would almost always be driving, an electric bass in our hands, and that kind of started to become so indicative of Butcher specifically that was something we specifically wanted to stay away from in Gen V. So we could still be garagey and punky and gritty and grungy, but we kind of wanted to stay away from electric bass in your face. And so there was a lot of 808s and synth pulses going on down in that lower range. And that's just not stylistically what we would ever do on the boys. And I think it's a subtle difference. As a composer, we think it's this big decision, and at the end of the day, there are people even noticing it. But maybe, you did clue into it, like, oh yeah, there's kind of, there's 808s down there, and there's room for them because we've made that conscious decision to take that electric bass out.
Mm. And another part I really loved was in the nightclub scene where, someone's lying on the ground bleeding and Marie saves them. And you could hear like the heartbeat in the background just going, boom, boom,
Yeah.
boom. Yeah. What can you talk about that scene?
That one, I believe, I would love to take all the credit for that. I believe that was the sound team.
Mm.
So that was more about us getting out of the way of that. And so that, if you listen to that cue by itself, there's virtually no mid to lower range information in our music because we did not want to step on that at all. So that's happening, but how can we still comment on and emotionally? And so in that scene, we were able to. Marie does have her own theme, and so we were able to do kind of a higher bell kind of based and then vocal based version of her theme. So it kind of like floats above that, and it is nice because rarely can we make too heavy of a comment musically, just because that's not our job on the show. But in that case, we really wanted to feel the feels because there's the rug pull of that actually ultimately not being a great development for Marie.
Mm-hmm. And there's this rather poignant moment where little Cricket is in the bathroom, throwing up in order to make herself smaller to please her date. And the score was very gentle and soft. And what can you tell us about that score?
Yeah, that's similar to what I was referring to before, where we're a lot of times we're touching on the layer below that's kind of a little more emotional, is um, um, or whose perspective is it from? And in that case, I would say the perspective is just audience perspective, and then it's like, oh, that's tragic. That's what she has to do to enable her superpower, and we didn't want to play it like weird as we often would in the boys. Maybe that's another reason why that scene stuck out, is so much of the time we're looking for dissonance and just weird. Like how hard can we push weird? And in that case, it was like, no, this sucks for her.
Mm.
And so yeah, it was soft, and we did implement those female vocals there, but in a very textural way. We were, we had her sing some lines that were kind of repetitive, and then we would reverse them. And so there was like a little bit of like weirdness and off kilterness there, but nothing that it was more emotional than weird. Hopefully.
So, I mean, this is a show about superpowers. I have to ask, what would your superpower be if you could choose anything?
Oh man, I should totally have this answer at the ready. Um, oh man, I'm such a parent. I've got two kids, and I immediately like wow, like, can I can I just come up with like a bubble, like a shield to be like ready to go, and like, okay, we're shielded from something.
Mhm.
I don't know. That's not a very inspiring conquer the world answer, but it's my first thought, and I can't get a better answer uh, to take its place.
I
Can I
mean, mine
ask
is lame.
yours?
Mine is lame. It's just like I want to
Yeah,
fly.
I mean, that's not lame. I think that I, can I list that as number two?
Yes. Well, before we go, The Boys season 4 is coming up on June 13th. Is there anything you can tell us about the new season without getting into trouble?
That's a great question. Um, they did release their trailers, which showed, some pretty good Easter eggs, and they released. Yeah, what am I? Boy, got me hemming and hawing here. Um, well, if I can just weigh in personally, I think it's my favorite season yet.
Mm.
How's that for just keeping it broad? I'm just gonna leave it there
Yeah, no, that's
because
perfect. Because I like the little teases like that. I don't like spoilers or anything, but I like knowing that it's your favorite. It'll probably be mine as well. I can't wait to see it. Yeah,
it's so good. The writers and Kripke, and yeah,
yeah.
they they know what they're doing.
Awesome. Well, Emmy nominations are coming up. We have our fingers crossed for you. Best of luck there.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much for the chat.